This is James Taylor, and you're listening to The Creative Life. This is the Creative Life Podcast with James Taylor, episode number 7. The Creative Life Podcast is a show created for you, the creative. If you're looking for inspiration, motivation, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's a musician, writer, artist, designer, performer, educator, or creative entrepreneur. They share their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, their insights, and much, much more. Hey, it's James Taylor here, and it's a pleasure today to have a wonderful guest, Austin Hill-Shaw. Austin is a San Francisco-based creativity speaker, trainer, coach, and author. Following 2 life-changing events, he began to explore the subject of creativity, wanting to understand the secrets behind creativity's seemingly universal appeal. His latest book is titled The Shoreline of Wonder, which is about our unique capacity for authentic creativity. I'm a big, big fan of the writing that Austin has as well. So Austin, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, James. It's great to be here.
So share with our listeners, what's going on in your world just now?
Well, what's going on in my world just now? It's a Monday in the Bay Area. It's early, and I'm just happy to be up. I love morning times. It's one of my favorite times of the day, just to have this quiet, the sense of the day in its process of becoming, and just the opportunity just to sit and reflect. And I always love to start my day simply by doing things that keep me aligned with the bigger picture. And what I mean by that, I like to do a bit of yoga, but I like to listen to lectures, typically spiritual lectures, but just have that sense of the meta narrative of being a human being, which I think is so important these days to just maintain that really sense of the sacred.
So do you have a kind of morning ritual for yourself, and has that changed over the years as well?
It has changed over the years. There's been a lot of different rituals, but I think that my morning rituals kind of started in earnest in about 2002, when I learned to meditate. And it was, I'd been living in the Basque Country for a year, and I'd gone over to the Basque Country in northern Spain with the idea that by going to another country that all my problems in my life would be solved. But what I discovered when I went over there was that my mind, of course, went with me.
Yeah. And
so that first year was both exhilarating and very difficult. And I was reflecting with a dear friend of mine, William Oken, who I've known all my life. And I said, I need some, I just feel emotionally all over the place. And he said, well, why don't you come do a retreat with us? He had just, he'd made a relationship with a Buddhist Sangha. And he said, there's a 10-day retreat. And I'd been offered a job in Bilbao to work in an architecture studio. And I was going to take that job, but I said to my new boss, I need to go back to the United States for a month. So I participated in this 10-day meditation retreat, and it changed everything. I felt just back in the world, grounded in some way. And from that point on, when I went back I moved from San Sebastian to Bilbao, and I would get up each morning and I would do a half an hour meditation. And I would do anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour and a half of yoga. And then I do another half-hour meditation either during my lunch break. We have 2 hours of lunch breaks in Spain, which was fantastic, or in the evening. And that really kind of set me off on a path of just starting the day with what's most important. And I think that's kind of coming back into the luminous expanse that lies beyond our thoughts.
So I know probably a lot of our listeners who are involved in various creative pursuits, maybe they've tried mindfulness practice or meditation before, and they've maybe got stuck at it as well. So when you kind of got into it, was that like it sounded like a 10-day? Was that like a Vipassana type intensive, 10 days? And did that help you just by having that kind of intensity over a number of days, really start making it into a kind of habit, into a ritual for yourself?
That's exactly right. I think that I'd been exposed to meditation years earlier, but I think that all these things have their timing in our lives. And so for me, again, as I expressed before, I was really kind of at the mercy of my emotions And I didn't have a system. My thoughts felt like out of control at times. So my life, the timing was perfect. And I want to admit that when I was in the first days of the retreat, we're sitting there we're basically in seated meditation for 7 to 9 hours a day. And there'd be sessions, and then you do walking meditation. And it was incredibly challenging. It was physically challenging just to be sitting there. And the first 4 or 5 days, each day I thought, wow, gosh, I think I've had enough. I'm about to leave. But I stuck it out. And, I think in sticking it out, then I got to, again, that sense of grounding. So I know that it's difficult to sit there, especially when we're so used to distractions and other things that we could be doing. And yet for me, again, the timing was perfect. And so having had that experience of just landing in the world again, it was also easy when I went back to Spain. I moved into a new city. I didn't know anybody there. And I had these wonderful Spanish hours. I worked from 9 to 2 and then 4 to 7. So I was working a 40-hour work week, but I had time to put these technologies to use. So,
and I mean, something that I hear from a lot of creatives who kind of worry around this idea of whether to do any kind of mindfulness practice is they say, well, I kind of love my monkey mind. I love that it gives me all these ideas and it kind of goes places, and I worry by quieting the mind, will that not stop some of my kind of creativity? I mean, you speak to like Google, and you speak to various, I know you do a lot of speaking events as well, where you're working with lots of very kind of creative people, whether in technology or whatever the field is, in writing. So you must hear that as a concern from some people.
Yeah, and I think that it was really interesting because a guy named Chogyam Trungpa, who I've kind of followed his lineage of teaching, and he's basically a Tibetan meditation master, one of the facilitators of bringing Buddhism to the West, and also somewhat of a controversial character. He really talked about, for example, he used Allen Ginsberg as an example.
Yeah.
There's something called the 9 stages of shamatha, which is the basic style of meditation. Shamatha vipassana. Shamatha just means dwelling in peace, and then vipassana means insight. So by dwelling in peace, you allow your thoughts to settle, which actually gives you insight. I think what people erroneously consider to be insight often is that monkey mind. And yes, they can get addicted to it, and it doesn't mean that the monkey mind doesn't produce interesting things, but I think there's a deeper level of insight that comes from the space between thoughts. And in my studies of creativity, insights are really equated to what Buddhists would call wisdom, which is primordial knowing before thought intervenes. Again, primordial knowing before thought intervenes. And when we have one of those aha moments, it's not a moment where you're thinking, actually. It's a moment that transcends thoughts altogether. And I think that having a sense of that is the goal within meditation. We recognize, okay, for things to become new and original and useful, it's not the recycling of mental activity. It's the opening up to really the self-existing, again, luminosity of the universe. And from that place, things like the universal law of gravitation come from, the iPhone comes from. It's people's willingness to get away from their thoughts. And then, of course, you can't realize any creative project without actually thinking. Then you actually have to engage the mind. But I think the balance between non-thought and thought is the creative journey.
And how did you first kind of learn your I mean, you have a number of crafts. You have this craft as a speaker, as a trainer, as a coach, as a writer, and obviously you come from the architectural side as well. When it comes to the thing that you're known probably most for now around creativity, how did you first kind of really kind of deep dive and start to develop your own ways of thinking about creativity and your own kind of frameworks?
Yeah, so... Well, first of all, as an adult, I've one of the things that I appreciate about what I've done is that I've really followed things that are of interest to me. And my first thing that I fell in love with as an adult was rock climbing. And I was at the University of California, Berkeley as a student. I actually live in Berkeley now, even though I haven't lived here the whole time. But I learned to rock climb, and the reason I loved it, the reason I fell for it, is it put me in flow states. And I mean, I wouldn't have called it back then, but when I was on climbing, it was this incredible unification of body, mind, and spirit. And so, in order to support that, I became what's called a batik artist. Batik is a technique that comes from Indonesia and Africa. It's a way of applying wax to fabric, but it was a way for me to not only express my creativity, but make good money so that I could be primarily out on the road. I spent the 2 years after university essentially in my car going around to rock climbing areas and climbing and selling batiks in order to make that happen.
So that was almost like a bit like a Tim Ferriss would call like a muse business, a business that kind of you create in order to then allow you to go and do some other things as well.
Exactly, and it was also engaging. I've enjoyed working on things and using my hands. But I would say, a couple years after I learned how to meditate, I was invited to participate in a 3-month meditation retreat. And I was just reflecting on this before our call. Actually, one of the people that was on that retreat was Julie Christie, who's the British actress. Yeah. And so during that retreat, there was only about 10 or 12 of us participating at first, and then most of them went to bed. There was only 4 of us did the 3 month, although people started out 10 days with a 10-day retreat at the beginning. But we were receiving a teaching on what's called the Wheel of Life, which is it's kind of a famous. There's a Buddhist image out of Tibetan Buddhism of, and it's almost like this round circle with these. All these activities happening, and it's sort of being held by this monstrous-looking character. But what it is, it's a big map of how people get stuck in their lives, how they get stuck in what's called cyclical existence. And when I heard the teaching, I thought, this is not only how people get stuck in their lives, it's how people get stuck creatively. And that was the seed that just started the exploration there. And that was in 2004. And at first I thought, oh, that's an interesting idea, but don't pursue it because you have a lot of interesting ideas and right now it's time to rest your mind. But as I went on, it just kept coming back to me as this theme, and I started writing on it. And 8 years later, I'm diligently writing on this thing, I produced The Shoreline of Wonder on Being Creative. And so it was just, the whole question was, what is creativity and why does it have such a universal appeal? And as you know, I'm sure from your own studies in creativity, it's a vast question.
It's huge. It's almost, it makes me feel a little bit like, I suppose, now you see on the front cover of like Time magazine about the mindfulness revolution,
right.
Which is, for a lot of people like yourself have been involved in mindfulness for a long time. It's kind of funny because it's 2,500, or it's much older than that. But anyway, and it seems to be with the creativity thing, because it is such a big area, and it's not really maybe had. It seems to, a lot of the stuff that's kind of gone on is got stuck in academia. Some really interesting ideas that are kind of coming out of studies, but it then kind of gets stuck there, and it doesn't seem to translate as well into people's daily lives, or some of those things that people are finding out about creativity doesn't often get translated into people's kind of daily lives, like maybe some of the mindfulness practitioners who then going to go on and teach as well.
I completely agree with you, James. It's they can get stuck in a lot of different ways. It can get stuck in, as you say, as academia, and also some of these spiritual practices can get stuck in the spiritual realms. Just people who are kind of almost renunciates, and they're sort of turning their backs on life. So I think the creative life, which I love the title of your show, it is about actually creativity and life. For me, are completely synonymous. Yeah, I think that creativity is not just one aspect of being a human being. It is the aspect of being a human being. And not only that, it is our fundamental core need. And therefore, when we start to look at it at that level, that creativity is, again, not something that you do once you take care of other important things, but is actually your most defining trait as a human being and a core need, then it starts to, when you bring that awareness to it, then you can start to see how you can start to apply it to all aspects of your life, including your professional life, your personal life, your relationships, your parenting, the innovations that you're coming up with work, the artistic endeavors you're in, even your spiritual and religious practices. It's a full expression there. So I agree that and I applaud you for your work. Is that I think what we are here to do is help people recognize that, these studies are really interesting, and neurological correlates like, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, or, all these things that's just more, it's helpful because it lets us know that there's a neurological correlate. But if I was to say, hey, James, can you decouple your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex so you can be in a more flow state? It's like, well, I don't know how to do that. Yeah. Most of us are aware of the brain.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I don't think a whole lot of us know actually how to engage different parts of our brain.
But essentially, you speak to a lot of companies as well, and I know you do a lot of seminars and training with different organizations. And so I'm imagining, many of those organizations that you've spoken with, maybe the research is, okay, that's interesting, but really teach me and teach my team stuff that we can use and we can actually implement in some way. So my understanding is in especially a lot of the world of commerce, maybe non-profits are slightly different, but a lot in the world of commerce, creativity has had a little bit of a bad name for a while, and you hear a lot more of the use of the word maybe innovation talking about when corporate leaders are talking about a lot of kind of creative things. So when you're working with organizations, what is your approach to actually kind of going in there and actually giving them things so that they feel, actually, this is going to make a difference both to the individuals in my organization and also the company as a whole?
Yeah, so my goal when I'm going in to present is to transmit the experience of being creative. And transmission is it's a very traditional term, but it comes back to Buddhism. It's the idea that you're taking the most open aspect of your mind and you're transmitting it to another person through an experience. And so because I love creativity so much and because I've written on it, I also can be susceptible to brain dumps. And I've done that in the past where it's like, here is all the information that I have on creativity, right? It just, it's almost like vomiting. Here it is, right? Here's the theory. And what I've learned slowly over time is that what people need is to experience what those aspects are of creativity. And for me, it's, one is the experience of insight. The second is the ability to manifest those insights. And the third is the meaning around that. And so as opposed to taking it from a point of view of let's define it necessarily, I try to start with really getting people to list their needs. Like, what is it that we need as human beings beyond food and shelter, and even the desire to procreate? What do we need as human beings? What are some of those unique needs? And when you start to list those, we can start to see how they start to get grouped into the categories, which are the three aspects of creativity. And so again, I'm wanting and work at helping people to understand experientially what creativity is. And then I have a very simple definition that creativity is connecting with the world and affecting it in a meaningful way. Again, connecting with the world and affecting it in a meaningful way. And the end products can be new and useful, but the experience of being a creator have to do with that. And you can apply it to management, you can apply it to leadership, you can apply it to be a more effective employee. All those things apply. But just to allow people really to get the sense that it is a core human need, and overcome that myth that certain people are creative and others aren't, or they don't have the gift. Well, that's kind of what I work on when I go in there. So,
what you're talking about there sounds like a much more humanistic, holistic way of thinking about creativity, and less maybe a systems type of way. When you're kind of it seems to be a lot of the things I've read so far in this space. A lot of them like to go in quite a linear fashion about this happens, then this happens, then this happens, because it's quite simple to maybe to tell that story. It's almost like a narrative. But you seem to be more, obviously, maybe your Buddhist influence as well. You kind of go at it in a slightly deeper way.
Well, it's interesting, yeah. So, I have a design company called Three Lights Designs. I'm trained as an architectural designer. We just were awarded or listed as one of our designs as one of the top 6 retreat centers in North America, a yoga retreat center called Prana Del Mar. So it's interesting. There's a lot on design thinking as well, and I recognize that that's just something we do. We iterate when we're designing. When I get together with my team, we come up with ideas, and then it's such an interesting thing because we just do it naturally because we've been doing it so long, but it's just that process of trying things out. So there is a linear process that you can get. I don't think that's a bad thing. And then the stages of creativity, that the 5 stages that are typically there, we don't need to go over right now, but I really like to get it, again, away from the, how should we say, that kind of linear module, because it's not that that's a bad thing. I actually think that's really good. But what, even before that, is really helping people to see that, again, creativity is the most fundamental aspect of who they are. I mean, there's no other word that captures what it means to be a human. I mean, anthropologists would say we're bipeds who make things. And so the reason that I focus on that is that when a person starts to identify as creative, it changes everything. And so, that's my whole, if you ask me the one goal that I have in this life, my intent in this life is to empower others as creators. And what I mean by that is to shift the needle from, most people in the world do not identify as creative. I think only about 25% of the world's population, based on studies, identify as creative. That means 75% of people say, well, that person's creative, but I'm not. And so my whole goal is just to shift the needle on that, to help people start to identify as creative. And not only that, for the creatives out there and people that are identified on one aspect of their lives, learn how they can apply creativity to all aspects of their lives.
And those folks out there that 25% who maybe self-identify themselves as creatives, where they work in the creative industries in one way or the other. A common thing that you'll have is maybe some of those folks will go through periods in their lives where they will have some period of let's say creative block, because I suppose a useful term for it just now as well. When you work with individuals that maybe have got to that point in their life where they're stuck, whether they're a writer or they're a musician or an artist, what advice do you give them to become unstuck?
Well, so when I work with individuals, there's a word that I really love to use, a metaphor that I love, which is called terma. It's another traditional term, but the terma is basically the idea of it means revealed teachings, and the idea is that a realized teacher or being will look out at his or her students and recognize that they have a teaching, but that they're not ready for it. The students aren't ready for it.
Yeah. So
they take that teaching and they hide it away. They either for later on in the mind streams of those individuals, or even in the physical landscape. So these terma, the idea is that, and when the time is right, these teachings are revealed. But I love that metaphor for individuals. I think that all of us, come in with a core wound, which isn't a bad thing. It's just the collective imprinting that we come into the world with, that we're here to work on. Sometimes it's shame, sometimes it's guilt. There's just these things that we come in with, which are almost like the sand in the oyster, right? It's the thing that we are working on in this lifetime. And so when a person is stuck, to me, it's an opportunity by which they're coming head to head with whatever they're here to solve, and that their core wound is here to be translated into what they're here to offer the world. So that sort of stuckness is, first of all, I say that, again, you are a creator, right? That's your nature. And that stuckness that you're experiencing right now is something that we can start to examine and go into. And often it's based on a limiting belief or a trauma. And, what I'll do is I'll work directly with that trauma. As soon as I meet a person, I said, if you want to do quick work here, let's do that. And we go right in there. And I've had people, had tremendous success in people shifting out of that just by going into that trauma and reworking it. So the trauma is no longer something that's holding them back, but starts to become fuel for their self-expression. And so that's kind of the nature of it. Is like these blockages, obstacles that come in our path. Again, when we recognize that we are creators in a creative universe, these obstacles start to be things again that are there to help us move to a new level of creativity. That's how I start to see it.
I mean, the idea of term, in your role as a teacher as well, I think is quite interesting. I was reading a book only last week, actually, by Ajahn Chah, who's a Theravadan, no longer with us, Buddhist monk, and in Thailand. And it was quite interesting. He had 3 books, and they were all. One was written for a layperson, one was written for someone maybe aspiring to become a monk, and the other one was written for a monk. And what was very interesting, and supposedly you would do this as well, these were speeches, these were talks he was giving. And what was fascinating just reading them was how he would change the metaphors that he would use based upon the audience as well, which is, I suppose, what good teachers can do as well. But it was very interesting just seeing that change in a teacher and kind of teaching them kind of where they're at. I mean, you use this kind of word term, like the teacher, or does that mean like the teacher or the teaching will be revealed in some way?
Yeah, it means revealed teachings, and it is. It's just, we all have our, we all have our basic, how should we say, almost like our maternal imprints and our paternal imprints, and then we have what I would say is a whole other cobbling, which in shamanism they call tonali, which is almost like a cobbling together of consciousnesses that are inserted into you when you at the point of conception. And so, when in working with people, I can see the effects of and having done this, and also because I live in the Bay Area and my office is in Oakland, I work with people from all different walks of life. I work with Chinese, Koreans, Vietnamese, African Americans, Catholic, Jews, Buddhists, people from India. And so you start to see how particular cultures shape people's experiences in life, how there's themes, and yet there's the individual that's trying to solve it. And so, and the other thing that I think is a recurring theme is that a blockage, a midlife crisis, whatever you want to call it, is typically where people are tired of what their ego is trying to present to them as the view of the world, and they're wanting to move into the space of what I call the self with a capital S. Carl Jung talked about the self. But people are wanting to surrender almost the shackles of their identity so they can start to move into a more expansive space. And I think ultimately, when you live a creative life, what you ultimately conclude is that on one, your lens on the world is incredibly important, and it doesn't function without its relationship to the universe that has given a rise to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I mean, and you have these different, I suppose, roles as a speaker and a trainer and a coach and an author, and obviously you're the architectural side as well. Which of those do you have the most experience of flow in?
Gosh, where do I have the most experience of flow? Well, I would say it's actually in teaching. The reason that I love to teach is that it allows me to enter into a flow state. And again, I don't always succeed at that. Sometimes I'm in my head and I'm giving more intellectual information than the students need, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes I can be, in sense of nervousness or sense of disconnect from my audience. That's happened before. But my goal in those situations, again, is to be a bridge builder, connecting heaven and earth, where I'm stepping into the space where I'm opening up and there's spontaneity there while there's also structure. And then I'm also riffing off the needs and the flow of energy of the audience that's there, whether it's one person, or many people. And that to me is really exciting. And it reminds me of what it felt like when I was a rock climber. When you're climbing,
you're kind of having to adapt to the environment.
Exactly, especially when you're doing a hard route that you've never done for the first time. You have certain techniques that you have going into it, but then you have to move in accordance to what the rock is presenting you, the different features. And so that's, to me, that's electrifying.
And that can sometimes be no easy thing to maybe kind of get some of the ego out of the way to feel that energy in a room and to be able to kind of react to that, especially maybe when someone's starting speaking, starting on a speaking career, or starting to do training events where there's a lot of maybe nervousness initially, and so they're quite inwardly maybe focused on what they're feeling. So it sounds like you've obviously got to a point in your life and your teaching where you can really experience that flow state and almost kind of play with the energy in a room, whether it's in a small group or you're speaking to a large audience.
Exactly, and I'm still learning. I you've heard the expression, experts are students first, right? I am in the process of learning, and I'll continue to learn. And I draw upon other people in order to help me figure out how to do things better. Because again, there's all these levels that we can move through. And for me, again, in order to be able to go into those flow states, there's different ways that I can do it. Like I love spontaneity, I love spontaneity.
Yeah.
When I went in for the recent Google talk, I thought, I'd wanted to do a talk almost as a form of improvisation where I'm doing it just off the cuff. And I kind of did that with the Google talk. But I also recognize that some structure in there is good as well. And I do. So I'm playing right now with that balance. And also I'm recognizing that even though I love to riff and to talk, that some people are visual learners, some people are audio learners, and also people can get tired of just me talking. So as I move forward, I'm starting to bring in more videos to show people little things so that I'm breaking up the experience of me imparting knowledge using exercises. That balance is something that I'm working on and will continue to work on for the rest of my life.
It almost sounds like, a little bit like jazz. I mean, in many lifetimes ago, I was a jazz drummer when I first kind of got started.
Amazing.
And with that, you have a form, that you're working within, but you're improvising around the form, and occasionally you'll come back and repeat certain themes and then go off, and then you'll connect with other members of the band, and you might go off on little kind of journeys with that person as well as you're trying stuff. So I suppose it's that ability to have that your technique, your skills as a speaker and an orator, as a teacher, are good enough that you've at least got that basic vocabulary to be able to do that. And then it's, as you say, it's just kind of learning, improving all the time. So those folks that may be listening to this who are they maybe they're in the 75%. They maybe don't necessarily think of themselves as a creative at this point in their lives, but there's something in their gut that tells them, I've got this idea, or I want to do this thing, this creative thing more. I've got this creative kind of yearning within me. What advice do you give to those kind of people just to start that they can unlock that natural creativity within them?
Yeah, the first thing I would suggest is just look at what kind of brought you joy as a child. What were the sort of things that you were into that you really enjoyed doing as a child? For me, when I was really young, I loved to get little lead figurines and paint them with like a one bristle brush, spend hours just kind of working on those. And I also loved models. I'm a really spatial thinker, and I realized that a lot of the things that I've enjoyed have had to do with just space and the understanding of space and direction and things of that sort. And so architecture is a beautiful example of that because I get to think spatially all the time, and I also love people. And I think what sets our firm apart is that we really try to enroll our clients as co-creators in the process, saying, hey, we have some of the information, but we're designing for you. So bringing it back to that individual who wants to start on something, just recognize that whatever that thing that really interests you, maybe it's dancing, maybe it is music, whatever it is, maybe there's a particular band you love listening to. Just be curious about that, and then start to say, well, what kind of expression could I have from that? Do I want to say, if it is music, hey, maybe I want to dance more. Maybe it's something, maybe I want to pick up that instrument and just try it out. and really have that sense of beginner's mind. Let's just try this. Let's not worry about getting it right or doing it well. Just, again, getting it. Part of being a creator is just going outside your comfort zone. So I encourage you, again, to look at the things that brought you joy. If you don't have joy in your life right now, try to remember a time that did, and look at, maybe it was the activity, but maybe it was some quality of the activity that was being brought there, and start to be curious about that. And that can start to bring back more of a sense of creativity.
Absolutely. And do you have any online resources or tools like Evernote that you absolutely love and you think our listeners should check out?
So for me, to be completely honest, I love to work things out on paper. And, the way that I schedule is I sit down every Sunday or Monday morning and I write things out. And the reason for that, I just like the tactile nature of it. I don't consider myself to be a very good thinker when I'm on the computer. So I will often work on paper and use the computer as an editor, as a way of editing or putting things together. The one exception to that is I actually do like making videos. And so I use Final Cut Pro. Part of getting your work out there as in the speaking industry, like videos are so powerful that I've really kind of thrown myself into that. And since I've started to learn that technology, now I really enjoy putting videos together, bringing in sound, imagery, and really it's become part of the creative process. It's become part of the marketing process too.
And so, that, I suppose if we go with like the analog side first on the notepads and pens, do you tend to use, are there any particular, are you a kind of Moleskine guy, or do you just kind of go with whatever's there? I know certain kind of writers, I was listening the other day to an interview with Roald Dahl, the author, and he always used a certain type of pencil, and because he knew that if he sharpened 6 of those pencils, by the time he'd gone through and 6 of them were blunt and writing in the morning, that was 2 hours worth of writing. That's how he measured his time, by pencils. So are there any specific notepads, or will you just kind of work with anything you've kind of got to hand?
No, I'm holding one in my hand. I use a Pilot Precise V5 extra fine black pen. That's what I use. And I have a clipboard, and I just basically use printing paper for my printer, and I keep probably at least 10 or 15 blank sheets of paper on that clipboard. I carry that around with me all the time, and I write things on there. And then I have a filing system. So I have physical files in my office that I put those in there. I have, for example, business topics, I have meeting planners, I have other people's copy, I have website ideas, and then I have the different quotes, for example, quotes on creative insight, quotes on manifestation, quotes on self-expression. And so I do like to handle the pieces of paper, and then I organize them in the computer. But again, my best thinking is done away from the computer. And that's another thing that I would say to your audience out there, is that the computers are incredibly powerful, right? But they are kind of one-dimensional. And also it's almost like, as one Taoist master who just recently passed here in the Bay Area said, when you're looking at your screen, it's almost looking at a fire. Just photons are flying at you. And so I think that getting away from the screen, for me, is actually one of the most important things. I try not to, I don't look at my email until at least 2, sometimes 4, sometimes 5 hours into the day, because I want to make sure that I'm working from what's important to me and not important to other people.
It's funny. So we obviously share a love of super fine pens as well.
Yeah.
I use the same pen, which I picked up when I used to live in Vancouver, and I think the company's called, the Japanese company called Le Pen, and it's like super fine, and it's used by a lot of architects actually. They use it for sketching and things as well. But goodness help anyone that actually tries to read handwriting. That's a completely different thing.
Yeah, for me too. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's almost like hieroglyphics.
Yeah.
It works for me.
Good. If it works for you, that's the main thing. And if you could only recommend one record and one book to our listeners, what would they be?
Wow. Gosh. Only one record and one book. So one record, I would say there's there's a DJ in the electronic EDM, electronic dance music out of the UK. His name is Tipper, and he has a album called The Seamless Unspeakable Something. And the final track on that, which is called Everything is Everywhere, to me is like a perfect audio representation of the perfection and interdependence of the universe. And there's no words, it's just orchestration and really interesting sounds in there. So Tipper's The Seamless Unspeakable Something. And then in terms of a book, what sticks out in my mind right now is one that was really what I read. I tried to read this when I was about 19 or 20 years old. It was Peter Mathiessen's The Snow Leopard. And then years later, I would go back and read it again. And I thought that was a really profound book. It was life-changing for me just to hear this exploration and the musings of this naturalist and practitioner moving throughout the Himalaya. And it's a really beautiful book. And he passed recently. Peter Matthiessen passed, I think, this last year. And I know he had some profound effects in terms of the writing. So that's a book that I absolutely love too.
Great. And if our listeners want to check those out, if they go to jamestaylor.me and look in the show notes for the podcast and just type in Austin Hill Shaw, they'll be able to find all the links to these as well. So let's imagine, Austin, if you woke up tomorrow morning and had to start from scratch. So you have the tools of your trade, which maybe pen and paper, laptop, and the knowledge that you've acquired over these years, but you have no contacts, no one. How would you restart things?
So the way I would restart things is actually going out and talking to people. And typically the way that I worked in the past is I would try to figure out everything myself, right? And I'd sort of protect my ideas. And what I recognize is that the more I collaborate with others, and it doesn't mean that I'm not working on things and thinking about things on my own, but the more that I work on something to a degree and then share it with others, I think that we can start to get feedback on our ideas more quickly. That's really pertinent. I mean, that's what we do in Three Lights Designs. We have our ideas, then we present it to our the other designers, and we get immediate feedback. This feels great. That feels off. Let's work this. Try that angle. And the other thing that it does is that it builds connectivity. It builds connectivity with other people around us. We all want to help one another, right? That's making a difference in other people's lives is really important. So the more that we're able to ask for help, I think that's really what it comes down to, asking for help and enrolling people in your process. That's the thing that I would do differently. And that's one of the things, James, that I'm still learning to do today, learning how to ask for help and learning to help other people help me and do what I do.
Awesome. So, Austin, share the best ways that listeners can connect with you, learn more about your books and your writings and your talks and everything else you've got going on just now.
Yeah, so the best way to get a hold of me is that you can go to www.austinhillshaw.com. That's Austin with an I. And you can find almost everything there. There's blogs, there's blog posts. There's a free creativity quiz there, which will allow you to understand kind of where you fit in amongst the three creative types: visionary, manifester, or self-expressor. And there's also going to be links to online courses there as well that have been developed, but they just, as you know, you have to hook them up with these technologies in order to get them to work.
Absolutely.
So they'll be out in the next couple months. So
great, and it's definitely worth going on the site as well. You've got some great blog posts. I was reading one just before we came on, where you were talking about the role of place and talking about the Bay Area and why is it so innovative, and a lot of things are so innovative. And so we didn't get a chance to go through that, but people should definitely going to go on the blog and read about what Austin's been saying on that subject. So, Austin, thank you so much for coming on the show. I wish you all the best. It's great that we can finally connect as well, and I wish you all the best for the rest of your day as well.
Thank you so much. And when you're out in the Bay Area, please give me a call and we'll get together. I know that you have your own busy schedule, but if you're out here, I'd love to sit down and take you out for some tea or coffee.
Absolutely. Hey, James Taylor here.